Beneath a sky the color of old brass, two young women walked the long road that wound through the Badlands. Dust rose at their heels like ghosts refusing to stay buried. Lila Mae Greyfeather, 20, and Rosalind Greyfeather, 22, had been cast out from the only home they had ever known. The air still held the echo of their tribe's verdict, voices sharp with suspicion, eyes colder than flint. The chief's silver brooch and his wife's ceremonial beads had been found in their small cabin, tucked beneath the furs they shared. The real thief, driven by fear, had hidden them there, but truth carries no weight against the fury of a crowd. Before the sun fell, the sisters were banished, their innocence swallowed by the dust of the desert. They carried little: a threadbare blanket, a tin cup, and the memory of river songs their mother once sang before sickness took her. Hunger pressed on them, but shame pressed harder. Every step away from the village was a step deeper into silence. The sun burned without mercy, and the horizon seemed to move with them, mocking their effort to reach something kind. Rosalind's lips cracked as she whispered, "Maybe they'll call us back." Lila Mae said nothing. Hope, she thought, could cut sharper than any blade. When the stars rose, sharp and watchful, they lay beneath a mesquite tree. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond sight. The sisters pressed close for warmth, the earth cold beneath their bodies. Lila Mae stared at the constellations, trying to name them like her father once did. But the names slipped away. Everything that had belonged to her now lived in someone else's hands. The wind moved across the plains like breath against the skin, whispering of a world vast enough to forget them, or forgive them. She wondered which it would be. And in that wondering, her eyes closed, afraid of morning. By dawn, their legs trembled from exhaustion. The plains gave way to a town sprawled across the basin like a careless spill of wood and metal, Bitter Creek. The first sign they saw read no loitering, no charity. Rosalind tried to smile. Maybe they'll have mercy. Lila Mae touched her hand. Or maybe mercy's something you have to make yourself. They entered the town quietly, heads lowered. Faces turned as they passed. Miners, merchants, women sweeping stoops. Someone muttered, "Thieves," and the word crawled up Lila Mae's spine like heat. Rumor had reached here first. Truth traveled slower than lies. That was something she was learning too well. By nightfall, they found themselves huddled behind the Broken Spur Saloon, where the trash smelled of whiskey and rain that never came. They shared their last crumbs of bread, and watched the lamplight through a crack in the wall. Rosalind's eyes glistened. "If no one gives us shelter, what do we become?" Lila Mae didn't answer. The question had no mercy either. Morning came with the clang of metal, steel striking steel, rhythm steady and sure. The sound came from across the dusty street, where a blacksmith worked outside his barn. He was a giant of a man, Elias Boone, 30 years old, shoulders broad as barn doors, beard streaked with early gray. His arms glistened with sweat, each motion deliberate, as though he were shaping not just iron but order from chaos. When he paused, he noticed the two figures by the alley. His eyes, gray as distant thunder, lingered, not with judgment but with the kind of seeing that carries thought behind it. The sisters stiffened. They'd learned how men looked at them, sometimes with pity, sometimes with cruelty, but this was neither. It was recognition, though of what, they couldn't tell. He turned away after a moment, returned to his forge, and the rhythm resumed. Later that afternoon, when the sisters returned to their corner after wandering the edge of town for water, they found a small basket left beside the barrel they sat on. 2 pieces of bread, a slice of jerky, and a flask of clean water. Rosalind gasped. Lila Mae scanned the street, but no one was near, only the faint shape of the blacksmith walking toward his stable, his hat low against the sun. "Do you think he?" Rosalind began. "Maybe," Lila Mae whispered, though she wasn't sure whether to feel gratitude or dread. 3 days passed before he spoke to them again. The third evening, as the sun dripped low and painted the street in amber light, Elias Boone crossed from his barn toward them. His voice was calm, low as a river in drought. "No one wants to give you shelter," he said, not as a question, but a fact he already knew. The sisters stood quickly, clutching their blanket. He watched their fear with quiet understanding. "I got more room than I need," he added, his words slow, each one tested before he gave it away. Rosalind hesitated. "We don't want trouble." "Neither do I," he said. "But trouble's already here if folks can't help each other." He led them beyond town, where the land rose into low hills dotted with sagebrush. At the top stood a cabin large enough to look accidental, as if built by someone who didn't know how to live small. Smoke drifted from the chimney, the scent of cedar lingered in the air. Inside, the cabin was plain but warm. A long table, 2 iron beds, a shelf of books, a rifle above the door. "You can sleep there," he said, pointing to a corner where quilts waited. Then, almost shyly, "Stay as long as you need." He left them alone, stepping outside to tend his horse. The sisters stood in silence, staring at the floorboards that hummed faintly with the heat of the fire. Rosalind ran her hand along the rough log wall, whispering, "It feels alive." When he returned, he carried a pot of stew and 3 tin bowls. Lila May finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" His answer came after a moment. "Because once, nobody did it for me." Then he ate without another word, as though that explained everything, and maybe it did. Word spread through Bitter Creek before the week was done. Whispers carried on the wind like burrs catching on every sleeve. "The giant's gone soft. He's taken in thieves. A man living with 2 Apache girls. Sin against God, that." Every whisper found an ear eager for it. The sisters felt the weight of that talk each time they went into town. Eyes followed them. Doors closed just slow enough to make their meaning clear. Once, when they tried to buy flour, the storekeeper pushed their money back across the counter. "Don't want trouble," he muttered. Elias stepped forward then, his shadow cutting across the floorboards. His tone was measured, but steel lived beneath it. "You'll take their money," he said. The man's jaw twitched. Something in the blacksmith's gaze, unmoving, immense, made obedience seem like the only sensible thing. The coins were taken. The flour was handed over. Outside, Rosalind's hands shook. "They'll hate you for it." Elias shrugged, almost smiling. "Let them. Hate don't last forever. Hunger does." Nights grew softer after that. The sisters cooked. Elias fixed the roof. They shared silence that became, slowly, a kind of conversation. Lila May began to read from one of his old books, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, her voice halting, uncertain. He listened, his hands folded, as though the act of her reading mended something in him too. Rosalind learned to ride, laughing when the wind caught her braids. For the first time since exile, laughter no longer felt like betrayal. But peace in Bitter Creek was never still for long. The preacher, a narrow man named Claiborne, called a meeting outside the chapel. "A man living with 2 women not his kin invites ruin on us all," he declared, his voice shaking with righteous fear. "If decency means anything, he'll send them away." The crowd murmured, hungry for a scapegoat. But Elias Boone wasn't there to hear. He was in the pasture, teaching Rosalind how to steady her grip on the reins while Lila May tended the fire. When a boy from town came running to tell them, Rosalind's face went pale. "They'll drive us out again," she said. Elias knelt by the fence, his voice steady as ever. "Then I'll walk out with you." It wasn't defiance, it was simple truth. The next day, when the sheriff and 3 townsfolk came up the hill to the cabin, Elias stood on the porch, hat low over his eyes. "We've come to ask your intentions," the sheriff began carefully. "Folks are talkin' that." Elias folded his arms. "They've been talkin' all their lives. I don't aim to join in. We can't have unrest." He met the man's gaze. "These women are my family. If this town's too small for family, it ain't much of a town." The words hung in the air like thunder waiting for rain. The sheriff swallowed, turned his horse, and rode back down the hill without another word. The others followed. Inside, Rosalind wept, her tears falling into the stew she stirred. "He'll never be welcome again," she said. Elias only smiled. Welcome's overrated. Peace ain't. As weeks turned to months, something unspoken grew among them, quiet gestures that said more than words could. Elias carved new chairs for the sisters, each marked with their initials. Lila May patched his torn shirt. Rosalind painted the cabin door a deep red. They had built, without realizing it, a small world of their own. One evening, as spring thickened the air with sage and promise, Preacher Claiborne came again, this time alone. He looked tired, almost humbled. "If you mean to live together," he said, "then do it before God, proper and right." Elias's gaze moved from the preacher to the sisters. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "You can stay as we are, or we can make this place truly home." The sisters looked at one another. They had been called many things, orphans, liars, outcasts, but never home. Rosalind took Lila May's hand. Lila May turned to Elias. "If it's kindness that built this place, then let kindness bless it." That night, beneath an open sky glittering like 1,000 watching eyes, they stood before the old chapel. The preacher's voice trembled as he spoke the vows. Elias Boone, the giant cowboy, stood between the two women, holding their hands, one on each side. "I take you, Lila May. I take you, Rosalind, to be my heart's peace, my home." When he kissed their hands, not their lips, the onlookers fell silent. There was something sacred in the restraint, in the way tenderness could hold its own without fire or hunger. Afterward, the three of them walked back up the hill. The moon cast their shadows across the grass, long and joined. "You're home now," Elias said, the word simple but heavier than any promise. Years would pass, and the town would soften. The whispers faded into memory. Children came to the red cabin door for bread, laughter spilling like sunlight. Rosalind grew herbs that cured fevers. Lila May taught reading to the miners' children. Sometimes Elias would sit on the porch, watching them, the sunset burning gold across his weathered face. And one evening, much later, Lila May, hair silver now, opened a small book she had begun long ago. She wrote, "We thought the world had closed its doors. But sometimes the world leaves one open, just wide enough for love to walk through." She closed the book and looked at the cabin, still standing, still red, still alive with the sound of home. In the wind, she heard Elias's voice as clear as the day he first spoke, "You're home now." And somewhere beyond the hills, where the land met the stars, it felt true.